Hey guys, welcome to another episode of
You couldn't
Pursuit.
even wait till I finish and then leave a pause?
Nope.
My mom beat me up.
Which brings us to tonight's topic. Why do good people suffer?
Me. I am the good person that will be suffering.
But that is what we're going to talk about, right? Why is there suffering, right? If we serve this great God who is good and loves us, why is there suffering? And I'll throw that question out to you guys before we go any further.
Because sin has entered the world.
Okay.
Should I elaborate?
If you so choose to.
Would you like me to elaborate?
That's your call.
Go ahead then.
Okay. I was gonna say, I think we should make it clear from now that Jesus is not the one that causes the suffering. It's usually the people. Well, no, that can be a little actually. Well, actually, he doesn't. He allows suffering. Does he cause suffering?
Good distinction.
We're saying God does not cause our suffering, right? It's because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying he sees it and doesn't necessarily stop it right away, right? He allows it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But why?
Because if you don't go through hard times, you'll never be able to. Well, we kind of talked about this in the previous episode for last week. Until you encounter your storm, you're not going to know how firm your foundation is.
Okay.
To an extent. Right?
Okay. So now here's a question I didn't want to do last week because I wanted to save it for today.
Thank you for that distinction.
But why even have the storm? Right? Because if you're building on a foundation, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it's not totally perfect and strong, right? And God knows it's not strong, why would he then, as you say, allow the storm to come and then put you essentially in harm's way?
Well, he's not putting you in harm's way. A lot of times it's the decisions that we make as people.
Okay.
And I say a lot of times, not every time on purpose. But also, why would you want to build a relationship if you knew it wasn't going to be strong?
But you don't know it's not strong until the storm.
Well, that's the purpose of the storm.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking questions. But okay, so the reason I'm saying that, because I feel like that's a lot of times when you have conversations with people who don't really know Christ. To me, that's how the conversations have normally gone, right?
Yep.
Well, but why, right? Because I think when you don't actually know who God is, right, even what we just said, right, where God knows you don't have a strong foundation, but then will still allow you to go through a storm that will potentially destroy everything you have, sounds harsh. Yes.
So, oh my gosh, it flew out. It went in and then it just went out. Hold on. Dang it was so good. Okay. He allows you to. Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Guess it wasn't that good.
No, it was so good, but I was waiting and come back to me.
The whole, I didn't want to make a joke by trying to remember it, but in my head I'm just picturing the meme of all the math stuff.
Yeah, literally all the equations, all of it.
Okay.
Wait, restate your question.
I remember my own question. Something about storms. I don't know. No, I think there's a lot of people, right, who, when you tell them I'll try and rephrase it here for you, right? Because I really don't remember how I phrased it the first time. So,
You have no choice but to rephrase it.
so I think a lot of times, all right, have you ever had like a weird friend?
Most of the times I am the weird friend.
Okay. So Asha, when you're telling people about Ariel, right?
Hey!
Yeah. I actually have two weird friends, if we're being honest.
Right? Okay. I love how it was never assumed it was me that was the other one. It was the two, so that's great. Unless we're not friends,
I was about to
but
say, who said you were friends?
Three weird friends.
wow. All right. So when you
Wow,
have
maybe
to
she's just the weird
introduce,
one.
when you have to introduce like a new friend to like your weird friend,
Mhm.
you have to like kind of like give them like some warnings and like a heads up, right? I feel like we really don't do that with God when we're talking about him with other people. So in the sense of we understand he's going to allow storms to happen, right? A lot of people don't understand that, right? So we can be like, yeah, well, God allows storms, but that doesn't make sense, right? Because you just said he's a good God that loves you. So if he loves you, why would he allow something bad to happen, right? And I feel like for a lot of us, we often sometimes don't know how to explain that God's love is not like a security blanket from the bad things of life, if that makes sense. There you go. Go for it.
I don't remember all of it, but
All right.
I remember some of it. So a lot of the times he allows those unfortunate things to happen because he kind of wants you to rely on him, right?
Okay.
He wants you to like cast your cares and put your problems onto him so that he can show you the depth of his love and the depth of the relationship that you can have with him. So it's kind of like an example. It's like a testament of who God is to say that I'm going to allow this to happen to you so that you can see how big of a God I am. So you can see how much I can bring to your life if you just come within me, like be with me.
So, based on that, I'll throw this next question out to you guys.
I hope I have an answer.
I hope you do too, right? How is that not God manipulating us into loving him?
Because he doesn't force you to rely on him. You can walk away. You have free will to do that.
Anything else you want to add there?
I was gonna say the same thing, so now I'm thinking of another thing to.
You gotta be quick with it.
I'm gonna start going first.
Okay, so hopefully everyone still that's watching is still kind of with us there, right? Because I know I kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate there, but I think it's important that we understand that these questions aren't really like foreign to believers.
Yeah.
Right? I think and often, at least like for me, I've experienced these questions with people I'm really close to, right? And it's often when they're going through like a really hard time, right? Where they don't really want to hear in that moment that, well, God allows storms to happen. Like you don't really want to hear that when you're in the storm. You don't want to hear that, right? So I think you were both kind of getting to this point that God, and I think you had said it originally, right? God causes our pain, but he uses it for his good, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I've heard that a lot in church, right? And I sometimes I'll be honest, I sometimes take a slight issue with the way it gets phrased because often the next thing is, well, you kind of have to like go through this pain to like grow closer to God, right? And I'm not really a fan of that logic. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
I don't think it's necessary to go through the utmost turmoil in your life to create or to build a strong relationship with God.
Okay.
I do think that sometimes it is helpful to, like, for certain people, like you might need to show, like you might need to be shown that you need to rely on God. But I think even with like everyday problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that can be enough to show you that you should rely on God. Like you don't need to go through like earth-shattering problems and stuff like that to have a strong relationship.
So I kind of always think of it in a way of like a teacher and a student. Like I kind of look at it as okay, like a teacher, obviously they want you to succeed, right? But they're going to test you on the materials that they teach you. And that's for
a really
your
good one.
own good. Like if they want you to succeed, but that doesn't mean that they're going to give you every single answer because how are you ever going to move on to the next level if you're everything is coming to you freely here? Like you won't know how to handle that, other grade and that new material. So I kind of look at it as like these tests that we get is exposing our strengths and it's also exposing our weaknesses. And it's if we take those weaknesses and turn them into to strengths. And that's how that's what God kind of does with us.
That was a really good one.
That was really
If that was further on in the episode, I would stop it right there.
That's it. This is just a quick episode.
But okay, so wow, that was a really good one, Asha. Good job.
Thank you so much.
5 gold stars.
I hope
What do
they,
they mean?
I hope they
Not
don't
a
get
thing.
taken away.
There's still more to the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, I really like that analogy. I think that's the perfect way to put that because then now when you start to look at suffering in that light, you kind of understand it's why is God allowing it? Because there's things that need to be revealed, right? And unfortunately, I think for most people, things aren't revealed unless there's pressure, right? Whether it's internal or external, I think for a lot of us, we don't really learn something new or anything like that unless there is that pressure, that storm. Unfortunately, I guess it might be called suffering happening. But I think what's also important to know is that though God will use it, He is not far from our pain and our suffering, right? I think the big difference between, let's say, your teacher and student is that God is like also he may be the teacher, but he's also like taking the test with you, right? And I think that's an important distinction that a lot of people go.
It's like an open book test, right? So like he's giving you the answer. You just have to know. You just have to take the notes and make sure you have it down as he's telling it to you.
Anytime you
Thank
have
you.
to say something, you just gotta blurt it out now. So I'm mad I yelled go.
No, and when you yelled it, I was so excited too.
And I feel like my answer didn't even live up to that.
No, it was. It was good.
I thought you remembered like the original thing.
No, that's gone. It's gone forever. It's gonna
No, watch it
to
come
me,
back to
like
you.
as soon as I fall asleep tonight. I'm
Just-
just gonna shit out of bed. That's what I meant to say.
Just like text me and I'll just like type it in. Or like just like a voice recording. So all right, focused. As I said, God's not far from our pain, right? As you said, it's an open book test, right? He is, and some really good analogy from the two of you today, I must say. I hope you guys bring this for the next episode too.
You might either get better analogies or just more delusional.
So what we're saying now, right, is not only does God sort of administer the test, but he's also giving you the notes and he's allowing, not cheat, but he's there helping you take the test, right? If you allow him, right? That was one of the things I think you said that was really important, right? We can either choose to run to him or choose to not run to him.
Run away.
All right, I guess my analogies aren't on point today.
Can't be
Right.
all this.
And I think it's also important for us to remember that when God took on the form of man in the form of Jesus Christ, he also went through pain and suffering, right? There's the obvious physical suffering he went through at the cross. But I think we often don't talk about the betrayal, right? I think because
Which one?
Judas, what other betrayal would there be?
Peter? Denying him 3 times.
All right, I guess, yeah. Yeah, I just don't associate that with the. Well, I guess they do call it betrayal. I don't know why I don't associate that in my head. All right, but with Peter and with Judas, right? You have 2 men that were with him for what 3 years or something like that, right? So even though Jesus knows what's gonna happen, he still has this relationship with these guys, right? And I've thought about it, and I can't imagine what it was like for him to know someone is going to betray you and not take the opportunity to like get away from them,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm pretty sure if you knew one of your friends is about to betray you, you do something to stop them or like outsmart them or something, like whatever it is, right? Jesus just allows it to happen.
I mean, what would be the option if he didn't allow it to happen?
Oh.
Would he have not died on the cross and saved all of humanity?
I don't know.
Because like that's because like when I'm thinking about like those are the only 2 options.
I don't know.
I guess
I really don't know. Like I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what would happen, right? But I mean, okay, fine. He had to let Judas. He didn't have to let Peter, right? That was, I don't want to say inconsequential to the story, but he would have still gone to the cross, whether Peter was there or not to betray him. So, and then on top of that, I know John is the disciple that they said that Jesus loved, but then Peter's the one that's going to build the church, right? He gets called the rock. Last week we spoke about building on rock on that solid foundation. Peter gets called that. So it, in my head, it had to have just really sucked to know these 2 guys are going to betray you, right? To know that Thomas won't believe you rose from the dead, even though you told him you were going to, until you walk into the room and you show him the scars in your hand. Like, I don't know. To me, that just had to just have been a horrible feeling, right? Yet I think we see all this happen in the life of Jesus, even the loss of his earthly father Joseph, right? We know that he passes away and things like that, right? We see these things happen so that we understand that when God is not, when we say he's not far from our pain, it's that he's also able to empathize with us.
Yes.
And I think, again, when we talk about suffering, right, we ask, why isn't God stopping it? But we ignore the fact that though he's not stopping it, he's there with us, right?
I think that's part of human nature. So it's easy to get lost in the fact that you're feeling all of these emotions and ignore the fact that he is there to walk you through it.
And even to that, I was thinking back to when we were going through Psalm 23, right? And that he leads us through the valley of the shadow of death, right? To me, it almost feels like the same thing, right?
Yeah.
He's not telling us to walk around it and avoid this dark place, but rather he's going to be there with us to lead us through. And as the shepherd, he's going to protect us through it, right? I think, I personally think the question is not why does God allow suffering, but why is God so good that he would go through it with us? Because he doesn't need to.
Ooh.
That was my one good thing
your
for
addition?
tonight. Yeah. After it's all downhill from here, folks. All right. So, I think there are 2 forms of suffering, 2 general forms. It's either internal or external, right? External meaning it's something else that happened around you and that causes your suffering, or something internal really, like if you have some type of mental health thing, or right, where though it can be caused by external things, I think at some point ultimately becomes an internal thing, or even um, you're sick, right? I'll attribute that to internal, right? um, and I don't think those are theological in any way, shape, or form, right? Before someone quotes me on that, I just say that because as we were researching this topic, um, there was a story of a girl, and I don't remember the name of the disease she has, in which her bones are extremely fragile.
Was it
Osteogenesis.
Something like that. I'm not gonna try to say that because I will butcher that word. I really thought you would know.
I think it is.
So while she looks that up, one of the things we were looking at, I don't even remember her name.
It is
It's so bad.
osteogenesis imperfecta.
What?
Osteogenesis imperfecta.
There we go. I thought you were saying her name was Imperfecta, and I was like, wait, what?
That's
That's definitely not her name.
nice.
I was like, man, her parents are reading it like her. Let's talk about suffering.
Oh.
I'm sorry. That was mean. I'm sorry.
First night. Oh my goodness. It really did go downhill real quick.
So I hope that I picked up on the microphone. So one of the things that she was talking about was the fact that she's born with this condition in which her bones are extremely brittle. It breaks very easily.
Yeah, she said she turned around in bed and she broke her arm one night.
I think she says she broke both arms too.
Oh, was it both?
Yeah, which I like. That's crazy to me. You can't even do that. That's crazy.
Like, do you know how many times I accidentally bump into things or hit myself? I would constantly be.
And that's one of the things she talks about. She talks about being in a car accident in which
Yes.
her sister
Mhm.
is the one that gets. It's the wherever I guess the sister was driving. Even though in the interview she does drive, but whatever happens, the sister gets hit.
Yeah, that side of the car was impacted.
Right. And the sister just like walks away from the car accident. But just from being in the car, the impact, she has to go do a bunch of surgeries because she broke a bunch of bones. Right? Like and this is something she was born with. I think she said the doctors told her parents,
until 1 year old.
like they told her parents, don't plan for her to be here beyond 1 year. Like that's a crazy thing to say to a parent.
Yeah.
And I feel like rightfully so, she goes, well, God, why is this happening to me? Right? And ultimately, she becomes a worship leader. So she actually meets people who also have other like serious, not mental, but like physical health issues and things like that. And she's able to sort of minister to them because she's gone. It's not that she's gone through it. She still has the sickness, and she's able to help them. And I say all that to ask this question of how, I guess, how do you as believers respond to something like that? Because I know we see people who have these issues where no one did anything wrong, right? They're literally like they were born with this, and they may end up suffering all of their life. What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, when I saw her story, I was more inspired than anything. I feel like sometimes we forget, in our suffering, because I mean, we're all human. We all go through our own struggles, and when you're in it, just you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and it's kind of like, oh, I'm the only one suffering in this moment. It feels hard, and then you watch a story like hers, which was like inspiring, and she's such a strong person, and she didn't let that suffering make her stay down. She got up, and by the grace of God, she was able to like live as long as she did. Even like going through the amount of surgery she did, she didn't let that like stop her. She like continued moving forward. Now she's like, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who like looked at her story and thought, wow, like, you know, like God can make something out of the suffering. Like she moved on to be like a worship leader. She did something with that pain.
I think because I know you shouldn't really compare your suffering to other people's sufferings because everyone is made for a different walk of life and a different like path through Christ. But it's like it kind of reminds me that although I do like you said, everyone encounters their own issues and their own like everyone suffers, but it allows you to take into consideration the fact that, and I don't want to sound insensitive, but I am blessed and I am privileged at the fact that I don't have as tough of a battle as a lot of other people. And it kind of allows you to check yourself because it's like, yeah, I'm suffering, but so does everyone else. Like, I don't have it the worst out there in the world. Like, I can still move through my suffering and I can still um, not like make myself an example, but I can make something of myself because it's I it's a very sensitive subject, so I don't want to like say the wrong thing or offend anyone, but it's like if because when you can look at other people's stories and see that the fact that they're pushing through regardless of these health issues or these struggles that they're facing, it's kind of like, why are you sitting in your suffering when you are like a healthy, able-bodied person?
The one thing that was going through my head as both of you were talking was, it's though the suffering we go through is often a personal thing, as you were saying, right? Like I'm going through this, and when you hear of this woman's story, you realize, okay, I don't want to say that necessarily that someone else has it worse than you,
Yeah, that's what I'm like.
but you understand that, okay, through suffering, God can still do something, right? And I think that's ultimately what we see happen in her story, and really in the story of a lot of people suffering, right? Regardless of the type of suffering it is, I think we see that there is, you see God at work. And I think that is the thing that we often lose sight of, because we don't want, it's great that God's glorified. I just think a lot of us don't want him to be glorified because we have to suffer, right? Because sometimes that is a steep price to pay, right? Forget just like our own personal growth, right? But I think for, as you know, as we're talking about this lady, right? Obviously, her story inspires us and encourages us to continue to seek God, despite whatever version of suffering we have. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure there are moments when she wished she didn't have to be this example, right? So I think that's um, something that, and I'm not sure if that brings comfort or not to those that are going through suffering, right?
I think it kind of helps to normalize the fact that obviously suffering is an unpleasant feeling to go through. But it also does like it's everything is what you make of it, right? So like we talked about in the previous episodes, or like even in the beginning of this one, like the storms that you go through, you can either run towards God or you can run away. The suffering that you're going through, you can either run towards God or you can run away. Like you can either choose to look at the brighter side of things and allow yourself to fall completely into God, or you can just sit in your suffering and just be there, which sometimes it feels like that is your only option, and sometimes it feels as though you're just here to suffer. And I think that's why it's also good to have a good community and a good foundation about you because then once you have that, you'll have people around you to encourage you and to remind you that, hey, you're more than just your suffering. You are more than just what it is that you're going through. Like, God has put you on this earth and put you in the position that you are for a reason.
Well, okay, if you're like being bullied or something, right, at school,
Okay.
right? And then you get through that. You don't know that like someone else is going through that same struggle, and like if God like took you through that struggle, that suffering that you were going through at that moment to, and it was for a purpose to like bless someone else, and that there's still like purpose within that struggle, that suffering.
So with that, I want to look at a story of Jesus and Lazarus, because I think a lot of what was said we see in this story, right? Because Jesus gets told um, that Lazarus, his friend, um, is very sick, right? Um, and I think to the people around Jesus, they didn't understand what he said, because his response to Lazarus is sick is, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this, right? Um, and then the next verse says, so although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he stayed there. He stayed where he was for the next 2 days, and then he finally leaves, right? When he goes back now, um, they tell him Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, right? And one thing, and I don't know why I've never noticed this in the story, just like the timeline of it, um, whether Jesus had gone like right then and there or not, by the time he traveled, Lazarus had already been dead for 2 days by the time he started, which means the day they came to him, Lazarus was probably on like his last few breaths. So there could have been a very good chance Jesus could have rushed over and Lazarus would have still have died anyway. But then of course, go ahead.
But I think it was more so a point of the fact that he was like, I'm still going to wait, regardless.
Right. So there was something interesting, like a commentary that said that there was um, I guess like a superstition sort of, that when a person died, like their spirit stayed in their body for a few days, like for like 3 days. So he waited purposely for 4 days so that when he would ultimately raise Lazarus from the dead, there'd be no confusion as to what happened. Um, but at the same time, obviously, we know the end of the story. Mary and Martha, they don't, right? And I think that's ultimately the description of everyone's suffering, even today, right? Jesus knows the end outcome of our suffering, why we have to go through this.
Can we clarify who's suffering? Because is it Lazarus is suffering?
Mary and Martha suffer. Yeah, right? They're suffering over the death of their brother.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever other friends or family was there, because there was seemingly a crowd of people there when Jesus arrived, right? I mean, to some degree, I'm sure even the disciples felt the loss of Lazarus, because they had visited before, right, the home. So I'm sure they all knew who Lazarus was, right? So I think ultimately Jesus does this, and of course it's interesting because Jesus announces, hey, God's going to get glory in this, but the suffering happens and people don't know how to respond, right? And what I just thought was interesting here, as as we're talking, it's just Jesus works on his own timing, right? And again, I know for those that are suffering, that's not what you want to hear, but it is I don't even want to say it's the unfortunate reality, because I think if you're trusting in Jesus and he ultimately knows what's best,
I
it's
don't.
really not
Yeah, I
unfortunate.
think that's just the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so again, I think we have to sometimes understand that in suffering, God doesn't work according to our deadlines. Like,
Mhm.
okay, God, I'm ready for the suffering to end. I'm ready to move forward. That may not be the case when it comes to what God is trying to ultimately do.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm kind of interested to hear what you guys think of when, as I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Lazarus and Jesus and what he's going to do here, and the conversation he has with Mary and Martha, about him being the resurrection and the life and all of that. What do you, I guess, ultimately take away from this story of suffering, of loss? I mean, it really is, when we talk about suffering, it's one of the, and I don't know if suffering is comparable, but it might be one of the worst forms of suffering that almost everyone will go through, the loss of a loved one,
Mhm.
right? So it's this sort of universal suffering that I think anyone can relate to. What do you guys take away from it?
Do you want to? I don't know, because she said she wanted to go first.
No, you can go first.
I think it is important to note that, like you said before, like it will happen in God's timing. Like He will take His time to show you what He needs to show you. Um, but He does give them those few days to like really sit in their mourning and their suffering, so that He can show them the goodness of God as a result. So, like I had mentioned before, sometimes it feels like all you can do is sit in it and just like wait in the fact that you are suffering and that you are going through things, and that's normal. But at the end of the day, you need to trust that God will work it out in His timing. And it is when you trust His timing that you will really see how big of a God He is in your life.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I think suffering really builds character, and I think that if if it didn't happen on God's timing and it happened right away, like He was able to heal um, Lazarus right away, um, that might be like people might take it to be like, oh, that was just a coincidence or a miracle.
Mm.
God did that for a reason. He wants you to put your faith in Him, and to know that He will come through for you as long as you remain faithful and that you believe in who He is and what He is capable of doing.
So I actually thought something really similar, that Jesus heals so many people throughout the Gospels, right? That for some people they might have just, if they weren't already believing when he's healed the blind, he's healed lepers, he's healed the mute, blind, mute, deaf, what, the lame, the one with the issue of blood. I mean, like, he's healed so many people, right? Had he healed Lazarus, if you haven't believed yet,
Mhm.
would that really have been the one to push you over, right? You know, so instead, he sort of has to allow something more drastic to happen, right? Um, at the same time, right? What is really interesting is, was it John 11:35 says Jesus wept,
Mhm.
right? When he gets to the tomb and things like that, he weeps, right? And I know I was reading some stuff that it's very unclear as to why Jesus actually wept. Some people say it's because he felt the pain of losing Lazarus. Some people he felt because some people still didn't believe and all this stuff. But ultimately, Jesus grieves in this moment, and I think it shows that he cared,
Mhm.
right? Um, though, as we stated, he allows suffering, he cares,
Yeah.
right?
I think it was that part of like, because Jesus was human, right? He was man and He was God. So I think that was kind of like a human reaction to losing your friend, right? A very dear friend. You know that in the end they'll be back, but as a person who has lost someone with such a good relationship to you, you're gonna mourn it, even if it's just for that short period of time.
Yeah. And I think we see that he cares. I think also then, because the fact that he brings Lazarus back from the dead, right? This resurrection happens. We see his power.
Yeah.
Right? And I think if we're going to talk about suffering, we have to talk about those two things, right? And I think ultimately, if you're going through suffering, you have to remember that one, Jesus cares, right? You're not alone in your suffering. Though you may feel maybe isolated from friends and family because of what's happening, you're not alone. God is with you. And hopefully this brings you comfort in the fact that ultimately God has the power to take you out of this suffering, out of this situation. And as we had talked about in Psalms 23 leads you to green pastures. Anything else to add before we end?
No.
That was weird that you guys said no and not yeah. I'm like so used to hearing yeah at the end. That was a really weird thing. Let's not do that again. All right.
Did you just tell me not to say no?
Just like at the end of it just felt like really weird. Like we always end the episode on yeah.
Yeah.
That feels better now. All right, thank you.
No.
No. You had to mess it up. All right, so that's been an episode of Pursue. I don't know where I'm going with that. Hopefully you understand why there's suffering in the world now. If you don't, I don't know what to say. I feel like we were pretty clear.
Yeah, I think we explained suffering for the entirety of the world. For sure.
In what, 30 minutes, 40 minutes? Yeah, all right. I'm gonna stop talking now and just roll the credits. We don't have credits, but roll the credits.